to cover left back. He's in possession at the moment, but was something that just jumped out into.
You crack on with that. I'll get more tunes on. Mark Cohen, Walking in Mem.
Here is a Bell Planet Colt radio from New Zealand, manufactured from 1957. I don't know the length of their production run, but I have read online the Bell Colt radio range was very popular. If this is of interest to you, brew a mug of tea or coffee, grab a snack, and sit back in your favourite chair and come along for the ride. Applying the formula lambda equals C divided by F, where lambda is wavelength in meters, C is speed of light, which for ease in this instance is 300 million meters per second, and F is frequency, or you can feed numbers into an online frequency calculator. 550 kilohertz, which is 545 meters, and 1600 kilohertz, which is 187 meters, which places this radio in the medium wave band. In the UK, a typical radio dial for the medium wave band starts at 550 meters, which is 0.545 megahertz, to 200 meters, which is 1.4989 megahertz. So this Bell Planet Colt radio starts at 550 kilohertz, which is 545 meters, which is 0.55 megahertz, to 1600 kilohertz, which is 187 meters, which is 1.6031 megahertz, which, as I have said, places this radio receiving ability in the medium wave band. I've looked online, and as yet I haven't located a circuit diagram. Looking at this gem's rear side, let's turn it round. The white mains lead looks as though it has been salvaged from a white goods appliance. Very doubtful it is the original. I only see 4 valves. None of them is a rectifier. There might be a valve rectifier concealed somewhere on this chassis, or there might be a selenium type hidden on the underside somewhere. The EL41 audio output pentode valve has gone to air. Fortunately, I have a few spares. Looking closer at this radio's cabinet, it's certainly constructed from some very hard wood. Just look at the thickness of its sides, base and top. It's as thick, if not thicker, than floorboard grade timber. Since I don't see any screws along the rear top, side and base edges, I say it's fair to assume it never had a back cover. I'll go on to remove the 3 knobs from the front and liberate the chassis from this cabinet. Note in this radio dial there are lots of radio stations included, none of which I have any clue about. The dial frequency ranges from 550 kilohertz to 1600 kilohertz, which comes under the ITU, that is International Telecommunications Union, Region 3, including geographic regions as Australasia, Melanesia, Micronesia and Polynesia. Applying the formula lambda equals c divided by f, where lambda is wavelength in meters, c is speed of light, which for ease in this instance is 300 million meters per second, and f is frequency, or you can feed numbers into an online frequency calculator. 550 kilohertz, which is 545 meters, and 1600 kilohertz, which is 187 meters, which places this radio in the medium wave band. In the UK, a typical radio dial for the medium wave band starts at 550 meters, which is 0.545 megahertz, to 200 meters, which is 1.4989 megahertz. So this Bell Planet Colt radio starts at 550 kilohertz, which is 545 meters, which is 0.55 megahertz, to 1600 kilohertz, which is 187 meters, which is 1.6031 megahertz, which, as I have said, places this radio receiving ability in the medium wave band. Right, looking at this chassis top side, when I get it in the camera, I don't see anything outstanding for 8BA type valves and one B9A type valve. Certainly by 1957 B8A type valves had largely been superseded by B9A and B7G types, or at least they had here in the UK. Bell certainly fitted a stout mains transformer to this model of radio, and the audio output transformer is missing off this loudspeaker plate. Right. Right. Now that I've flipped this chassis over, we can take a look at its underside. Well, this audio output transformer explains the reason for the absence of an audio output transformer on the loudspeaker bracket. The wire wound pi filter resistor looks to have gotten hot under its collar at some time. There's a good reason. It could be OC. There's also a good chance at least one of the smoothing or reservoir electrolytic capacitors is at least electrically leaking. It's unusual to see ceramic coupling capacitors inside an audio section. Apart from a fairly modern, or at least more recent than this radio, EL41 cathode bypass electrolytic capacitor being fitted, and a replacement audio output transformer fitted onto this chassis underside, this chassis looks pretty much unmolested. Right, I don't have any Bell service data. As far as I'm aware, Bell did not export electronics products to the UK. I certainly have never seen any. I'll get ready with paper, pencil, rubber and ruler and spend a short while assessing how I might reverse engineer this radio circuit. Back once I've given this chassis a good looking over. Rather than boring you to tears, I've reverse engineered the Bell Planet Colt radio off camera. The time taken to produce this scrappy drawing took me the best part of 2.5 hours. Yes, it sounds incredible, but alas, 'tis true. It took a further 1.5 hours to produce a neat copy of my original copy drawn onto this piece of dull grey card. So, my friends, doubtful any of you would have appreciated me including a 5-hour step-by-step account on camera of me drawing rough and neat copies of this wee Sindel band radio. Think of the time it would likely take to reverse engineer a multi-band radio that includes VHF. It would take pretty much close on to a full working day. How do I know this for sure? Because I've done it. Having checked my neat copy of my reverse engineered circuit twice, I shall use it throughout this reconditioning of the Bell radio. Right chaps, in my usual fashion, I've rebuilt the power supply circuit along with the audio output and the preamplifier or audio first stage, whichever one you prefer. My efforts here involved replacing the electrolytic capacitors in the power supply, just there. I was quite surprised when this wire wound 1K resistor read OK. It's very badly scorched, so I didn't expect much. The 2.2K where is it? Yeah, pi filter resistor read as being well inside its 20% tolerance, and I've replaced the mains lead that came with this radio. It was more suited to a microwave oven or a dishwasher or some other kitchen electrical appliance. It had been replaced with this thinner, more flexible 3-core double insulated mains lead. It now requires a mains plug. I've relocated the audio output transformer back to the speaker back bracket. Just there. It looks a lot better. That was where it was originally. Being a couple of millimetres or so proud of this part of the chassis, the chassis did not seat comfortably inside the cabinet. it tended to seesaw slightly. I replaced the volume control purely because I wanted the double single pole type, because I wanted to free up this tag strip. One side of the mains input was connected to this particular terminal just here. I've decided not to include the audio output EL41 cathode bypass capacitor, since the audio might be distorted when the volume is turned up to a higher level. We shall see a little later on whether I'm right or not on that particular point. Now that I've completed rewiring and replacing defective components in both the power supply circuit and the audio section, I'll now progress towards the front end or receiving circuitries of this radio. Looking at this wax coated paper and foil capacitor, just there, I haven't seen Ducon capacitors for years. In fact, I can't remember the last time I saw one. There are, let's see, yeah, there are two Ducon capacitors inside this wee radio. It's certainly high time they were replaced. I'll go on to check these 4 carbon composite resistors. If any are out of their tolerance rating, they too will be replaced. Other than those I've mentioned, everything else looks to be in reasonable order. I'll get back to you once all of that is out of the way. Barely no sooner said than done. I've replaced the 2 Ducon capacitors, checked the 4 mentioned resistors, which incidentally are in tolerance, and tested the 4 mica capacitors. It's there. This radio is ready for its first test. All I need to do is fit this mains plug onto the end of this mains lead, plug in and switch on. Always remember, when fitting a 13 amp mains plug onto the end of a mains lead, to fit a 3 amp fuse just there, especially when connecting it to a small vintage radio like the Bell Planet Colt that I'm restoring here. The brown wire, being the live, is connected to the nearest terminal to the fuse. The blue wire, being the neutral, is connected to the left of the plug terminal. And the yellow and green spiral wire is connected to the top of the plug, being the earth. If you are not familiar with wiring a UK mains plug, engage someone who is competent. Electricity kills. If you are following along with this radio restoration, or any of my radio restorations, you are doing so at your own risk. Your safety and that of other people is of paramount importance. And here we have it, chaps.
As well. And then big news on Saturday night, 9 o'clock on 5 Live. Full commentary of...
A friend of mine was talking about this. He heard this song. It needs to be transported back where they lived at Brighton Beach, and you could see it, you know, you could see it so clearly.
Becky measures.
1999. 1999. Ricky Martin's
UK.
Right, £120,000. Very soon you could be...
Say,
Yes, One Bell Planet Radio working once again. I'll need to do a few further refinements. One of them will not be an IF or oscillator to dial alignment, since I do not know the intermediate frequency of this radio. It can be so easy to mess a radio up by misaligning. So on this occasion I've decided to leave it as is, since it is performing quite well. Right, I will quickly go on through the circuit diagram as a way of recapping what needed doing to get this radio working. The first and most important job, in my opinion, is to be equipped with a circuit diagram. Unless one has totally memorised a particular radio circuit, it is unwise to work on a piece of electronics equipment blind. Yes, you may have probably worked blind on, say, a few radios in the past. I know I have, on countless occasions. But the fact remains, it is not good practice. As most of you know, my usual modus operandi is to get the power supply working first, immediately followed by the audio output. One needs an LT 6.3 volt rail to the valve heaters and around 220 volts HT rail. One is able then to proceed onto the audio output stage. And if the radio is not a short receiver, that is to say the demodulator signal is not fed directly onto grid 1 of the audio output valve, one can also do voltage checks and necessary work on the preamp or first audio stage. By getting the power supply and audio working, one has the means to power as well as listen to our well, or not as the case may be, to the radio front end or receiving circuitries. From the front end, which in this instance is the ECH 81 frequency changer, one works towards the centre or demodulation circuit. Having checked voltages, if they are printed onto the circuit diagram, one is able to get a very good idea whether or not the associated circuit is working. One can, should they be au fait, use an oscilloscope as well as a signal generator. If you have noticed, I personally don't talk much about valve testers. It is very rare I use one. When I do use one, I only accept what it tells me as, at best, a guide. Once I've worked my way along the front end, from the frequency changer, onto the IF amplifier, and through to the demodulation circuit, I then work my way back to the frequency changer and the IF amplifier via the AGC delay line. Once I am satisfied everything is working how I feel it should work, I then go on to do an IF alignment as well as an oscillator to dial alignment. If the radio is pulling in the stations and the audio is clear, I then deem the radio repair as being complete. you will notice I have drawn an X or crossed out the audio output valve EL41 cathode bypass electrolytic capacitor 22 microfarad. Personally, I'm not convinced it requires a bypass capacitor. What I am inclined to think is someone at some time thought fit to stick one into this radio's circuit. We shall see whether or not this radio's audio output circuit requires a cathode electrolytic bypass capacitor. At present there is a fair amount of mains-borne interference. At some times of the day it is worse than others, so omitting the cathode bypass electrolytic capacitor might not show up as well as I would like. Nonetheless, here goes.
Get the info out there so every player had something of a way to try and look after each other, and just if anybody heard anything of what was going on, we tried to share it in there. So there will be.
I've connected a 22 microfarad onto these two crock leads.
A lot of players where they probably won't come back to football because they'll probably have to go into jobs and maybe go part-time, which probably you'll find a lot of players do that this summer.
And what about yourself then, with this whole, like, I mean, you did the supermarket and you got to do deliveries as well. What's been, like, the craziest point of the pandemic for you? The craziest delivery, craziest night?
Yeah, I'm not sure, like, there's a few on the deliveries where you turn up and they've got, like, the big flags out in the garden and, like, come in and, you know, there's been a few like that, or just some people you turn up and, like, they obviously didn't know I was doing it and they're like, looking at you and they're thinking, because I'd shaved my hair off as well at the start, so looking, you can see they're thinking, and so there's really few on that road, and then obviously in Tesco's a couple of times you can see people, like, obviously I'm doing night shift so you don't see too many customers, but the odd time when you can see them, like, they keep looking, like, you'd say, like, it's not the captain surely, and but like I say, I just see it as I've got 10 months left on my contract.
I'm definitely not convinced that I'm going to include a 22 microfarad cathode capacitor into this radio. I think I'll leave it as it is.
I think I got over 80s category, so I was ringing around. So this was right at the start of lockdown, and we were just ringing basically.
I think it sounds okay as it is. These two binding post sockets look far neater than the floating wires. Once I've soldered the relevant wires onto the rear of each socket, it will be good to go. I'll no longer need to use a crocodile lead to connect an aerial to this radio. And here we have it, chaps. Aerial socket and earth socket.
Can you do the bins?
In a minute. If there's one thing...
Connected up and working.
If there's one thing I'm learning about spending more time with my family, it's that we need more space. So I'm taking the JSS virtual showroom tour, looking...
The next task is to replace the old rubber grommets, acting as shock absorbers for the tuning capacitors. All three are in an advanced perished condition. As can clearly be seen. I can't let it go out like that. Right, I'll be back when I've located 3 suitable grommets. I've located 3 rubber grommets, liberated the tuning capacitors, and yes, certainly looks very grungy. Right, I'll clear this grunge off here and fit the grommets to the tuner unit. It hasn't looked as clean as that within the past 50 odd years. That's the rubber grommets fitted. Right. Now reinstall this back onto the chassis. Right, that's the tuning capacitors back in place. The bearings are lubricated. Whilst I was at it, I cleaned up the dial reflector, and I've cleaned the dial glass. Right, my next task is to polish up this grubby looking cabinet. Having washed this cabinet with dish soapy warm water, it soon became quite evident that a quick polishing over was out of the question. There were too many scrapes and dings to ignore. I felt there was no alternative other than to strip the old lacquer from the surface and use different grades of abrasive paper to achieve a smooth surface on the top sides and front. Next for this cabinet tidy up job is to apply wood filler onto the top corners, just there, and along the top sides, as well as the other side as well. The old wood filler fell away whilst I was stripping the old lacquer from this cabinet. Once the wood filler has been applied, allowed to harden and smoothed with abrasive paper, I will then go on to apply wood grain filler to the top sides and front. Right, as you can see, this wooden cabinet has been given some wood filler treatment. Applying wood filler is one of the most straightforward operations. What can be one of the more boring aspects to cabinet restoration is applying abrasive paper. And I must stress here, I'm no cabinet restorer. I just muddle along as I'm doing here. Nonetheless, once this cabinet has been smoothed over with fine grit abrasive papers, it will be time to seal the open wood grain pores. I'll give a couple of progress reports as I smooth this cabinet over. Fingers crossed, I've a reasonably good feeling it might turn out fairly decent. Working the right hand side of this radio cabinet with P120 abrasive paper, I've smoothed over what had been a hole bored through the wood through to the inner side. That too has been smoothed over. A long thin slither of wood was torn from the top back edge of this cabinet. That too has been filled with plastic wood filler. I'm not trying to achieve perfection here. As I've said, I'm not a cabinet restorer. I'm doing the best with the limited woodworking knowledge I have. Right, I'll do a bit more smoothing over and I'll get back to you with a second progress report in a little while. I'm no expert on types of timbers, but My best guess is the type of timber this radio cabinet is made from might well be oak. If it is not oak, then I'd say it looks very much like oak. I've smoothed the top, sides, and front of this cabinet with 400 and 600 grit abrasive papers, and it has begun to develop a mild sheen in some places. The wood filler is blending in fairly well. Hopefully it will blend in some more once I've applied a coat or two of wood stain. Before I do anything like that, I need to seal the open wood grain pores. My method for doing that is to give the areas I've smoothed over a few coats of egg white and a fine smoothing over between each coat when dry. Fingers crossed and toes crossed if possible. This particular task will turn out at least okay. Wish me luck. Since my wife has an egg separating tool, I'll ask her if she will be good enough to separate the yolk from the white of this egg into a bowl, and I'll brush it onto this cabinet. Look at that, eh? My wife's a good un. Right, here goes. Right. I've never done this before. Not applying egg white onto bare wood. And to see how it turns out. Right. Right. If the cabinet looks awful, it might taste nice. Right, that's the top done. Let's give it a little extra. Right. Now the front. Get inside the speaker grill. Right. I'm going to get plenty on. Yes, certainly not skimp on the egg white. As I've always mentioned when doing certain jobs. I'm very much a belt and braces person. Make sure it's got plenty on, make sure it's done right. Little hairs come off the brush. Right. Right, I think that's about right for the front. I'd say I'd slobbered enough on there. Right, now the sides. Oh, that's that side done. This method, what I'm doing here with the egg white, is, well, some people use it for, or apply it for guitar finishes, you know, the finish on guitars. And some of those are very, very smooth and very, very shiny. I'm not too bothered about achieving smoothness and a shine to that extent, but if I get it looking reasonably good, I'll be satisfied. Oh. Just a little extra for good luck. Right. Right. Now that I've slobbered a coat of egg white onto the top, front and sides of this cabinet, I'll leave it 24 hours to dry before wetting and smoothing, and then slobbering on another coat of egg white and repeating the process until the surface feels as smooth as a baby's derriere. As you can see here, 24 hours on, I've applied a small amount of water to enable this P320 abrasive paper to move steadily along the grain on the surface of the wood, and as it does so, it produces a fine paste from the wood dust, which helps towards filling the open wood pores. I'll continue doing this task and allow it to dry for a generous 12 hours before applying another coat of egg white, which I'll leave to dry a further 24 hours. A further 36 hours on from a second application of egg white, and 12 hours after smoothing over the top, sides and front, they are most certainly as smooth as a baby's derriere. I gave this cabinet a final smoothing over with 800 grit abrasive paper. Now there is a dull lustre appearing, certainly in more places than they were before. I'll go on to apply a light coating of Georgian medium oak wood stain. Georgian medium oak wood dye applied. I have to say, the wood grain is immensely enhanced. I wouldn't want this cabinet to be any darker, and I wouldn't want it to be any lighter. For me, the tone is perfect. I believe this cabinet will look just how I want it to look after I've given it a few light coats of clear varnish.
Oh, very good. How did they get on?
Right, this chassis, tidied up and looking fairly respectable, is now ready to be secured into his cabinet. One little tip: always be on the lookout for dirty valve pins. Now, dirty valve pins can impair a radio's performance. In some instances, though fairly rare, it can stop performance. In such instances, it would be so easy to mistake the valve for being defective. Right, I'll pull one of these out. There we go. Nice and clean. Right, I clean the valve pins by lightly scraping them with the point of a modelling knife, and then I polish them with a fibre brush. Be very careful when scraping with a sharp modelling knife. It is easy to slip and cut your fingers. You definitely don't want to do that. As I say, exercise care at all times. Right. When I'm satisfied the valve pins are clean and shiny, I squirt a small amount of switch cleaner or deoxate into the valve base, insert the valve and gently rock the valve to and fro for a few seconds to work any surface dirt from the valve base forks. Right, I'll now bring this radio's cabinet to the bench.
Hurricane killed the game. The way he connected the game, the way he was dropping, the way he was allowing Sonny to be attacking spaces because he was
plenty of volume there.
Harry performance was amazing.
Meanwhile, Liverpool beat Chelsea 2-0 at Stamford Bridge. Europe beat 7-0-3.
Across Yorkshire.
You'll know us Hussein.
BBC Local Radio.
That's all impressive.
fantastic stats into the Premier League. He made his debut January 2017. He's had more...
There's nothing much at the bottom end of the medium wave band. Right. One Bell Planet Colt radio, manufactured in New Zealand and introduced in 1957 for presumably their domestic market only. Its cabinet was not in the best of condition. I've done my best to get it looking reasonably decent. My goal was to achieve a semi-sheen for this cabinet. I didn't think it looked good having a lustre that was as shiny as a wet pane of glass. I managed to get its top, sides and front very smooth. Yeah, it feels, when I'm touching it, like a waxy formica surface. Yes, I'm pleased with it, but I'm definitely no cabinet restoration hand. Turning this radio round so we see the rear, the chassis looks fairly clean and tidy. The two sockets for aerial and earth are certainly welcome improvements. I'm not going to go into circuit theory on this occasion, but I've amended the circuit diagram I drew, having reverse engineered the circuit of this radio. About 4 days after I did that, an Australian gentleman, Mr. David Tipton, I advise you to go onto his website. He does some wonderful restoration jobs on vintage radios, both valve and solid state. He informed me of a New Zealand vintage radio website. I've included its link below. There is, on that website, information about this model of radio, including a circuit diagram, and it very largely coincides electrically with this circuit diagram I produced, which works fine as a reference since I consulted it to get this Bell radio working. This radio restoration made a refreshing change from restoring my usual British manufactured radios. It will be the only radio for ITU Region 3 in my vintage radio collection. I do thank you for coming along with me on the journey to get this wee radio working. I hope you enjoyed seeing what needed to be done in that process. If you are a radio collector and restorer like me, and you see an old radio that originates from overseas, give it a go. Very likely you will find it to be a rewarding venture. I thank you for your time and interest. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you have not already done so. I appreciate your support. Until next time, take good care of yourselves and one another. From Phil.